Well, thank you all for being here and for inviting me. This is an honor. And I will tell you that when I was in graduate school, if you told me that I'd be giving a talk at a natural history museum, I would have laughed. So I'm looking at the students and telling you, it's not that much time between you and me, and pretty soon you could be up here. So just think about that. How many of you have heard of 30 by 30? Oh my God. How many of you have heard this talk? Okay. That's good. Well, you're going to hear more tonight, and I'm hoping by the end of it, you're going to, one, see that actually you're already part of the movement and you're helping us make progress, but that I inspire you to do even more. And yes, I have the coolest title in the state, if not the world. So I want you to take a minute and look at this picture. This is the only planet that we know of that supports life, although Hubble might change that any day. But at the moment, this is all we know. And I want you to remember, if you had this, 6th grade Earth science. And remember when there was like the weird diagram with the cutout. Most of the Earth is rock, or magma. And the biosphere, where we live, is this just handful of miles that is a membrane around the Earth. It's a giant planet, but where we live is this little tiny film. And what makes life possible on this planet, if you know evolution, is actually all the other life on this planet, right? The oxygen we breathe is made by the magic of photosynthetic organisms who take sunlight and carbon dioxide, and they do chemistry, and they give us oxygen. And those plants do not exist without soil microbes that help them take up nutrients, without small mammals that move their seeds around, without pollinators that help them reproduce. And without trees, we don't have air. So the ecosystem of this planet is made up of a series of life support systems that allow us to exist. And when I think about the Earth and I think about us, it's really easy for us to forget that we are actually part of this ecosystem and that the life support systems of this planet rely on us protecting the biodiversity of it. The best analogy, and I've thought about this for 30 years and I finally came across it, really is the Jenga tower. You know, you can take out a lot of blocks, but at some point, that tower will fall if you take out enough. Ecologists understand this deeply, intuitively, and they know that the biodiversity crisis is just as existential as the climate crisis. And it's indisputable that we as a species cannot live without the other species of our planet. And yet we are destroying biodiversity at a rate that is 1,000 times background. So this is not a joke. This is something that we really need to pay attention to. So 30 by 30, which is the subject of my talk, is the increasingly mainstream understanding that we need to protect nature to protect ourselves. In December of last year, 190 countries came together and committed to protecting 1/3 of the planet by 2030, which is really exciting. Probably not enough, but it's a really great start. And we, in fact, were there when this happened, and it was exciting. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about that. So first, why 30%? Oops. So E.O. Wilson, who's the father, I think, of conservation biology, who coined the term island biogeography and discovered that bigger islands closer to the mainland protect more species than those that are farther away and smaller. And this actually created the sort of root of our desire to protect habitat, to protect species. Bigger areas, protect more species. He suggested that we should actually protect half of the Earth, and he wrote a book about that. But half Earth would freak a lot of people out. So I think we started with 2030 as a really good starting point, and the rest of the globe agrees that that's a place we can begin. But you don't need to understand species area curves to know that protecting nature is really important. These are some of my favorite places in California. I could have made 1,000 pictures. And what makes 30 by 30 so powerful is it takes something really complicated, like a species area curve, and turns it into something very simple, which is that protecting nature is important And this movement is accessible to all of us. This is a bit of a humble brag, but California is actually leading the world in our effort to conserve 30% of the planet. So we committed to 30 by 30 in October of 2020 by executive order. And I was sent off on the path of figuring out how the heck we were going to get there, and actually how far along we even are on that process. And we're the only subnational anywhere who's actually put together a strategy for how to do it. And I will tell you that this strategy was put together over a course of a year, all during COVID. We did 17 workshops online. Thousands and thousands of people tuned in. Some of you that raised your hands, maybe you were already there, and gave us feedback on how do you do conservation in California. California has always been a conservation leader, but what are the ways that we do it? How do we get it done? What are the programs that work? What are the approaches that work? What are the ways that we should get this across the line? And this report that we put out, it sort of is like the great aggregator of all the incredible conservation work that has come before it, all the science, all the community activism, all the land trusts, all the people that have said, we need to protect this place. We've pulled together all the best practices from that work into this strategy. So I'm going to unpack what California's 30 by 30 is for you. So if you're going to count to 30, the first thing you have to do is actually say, what are you counting? And this is the conversation, and if I have Q&A at the end, I guarantee you will all have questions about this. This is the thing that is vexing the globe, is how do you define what it means to conserve a place? And California struggled with this. We rewrote this sentence at least 15 times. And you may think it's not that great, but it is in fact an amazing sentence because we want land and coastal water areas that are durably protected and managed to sustain functional ecosystems, whether they're intact or restored, and the diversity of life that they support. This notion of durability is quite controversial. There are many places that are like, it's probably good enough if we just conserve some places that for a while, or it's temporary, or it's not permanent, but it's good. But if we want to actually protect biodiversity, we want some confidence that it's going to be there into the future. And then this question of whether we're protecting diversity of life, biodiversity, intact ecosystems, that's also somewhat controversial. There's conversations about 30 by 30 where people just want to count city parks, which are very important for giving people access to nature, but they are not going to get us to the core value of protecting biodiversity. So it's complicated, in fact, to put these definitions together. But California is recognized for having one of the strongest and most robust, scientifically defensible definitions out there. So what does this look like? In fact, it's a lot more than you would think. This includes dedicated conservation areas like Yellowstone and Yellowstone. Did I just say that? Yosemite. It is late. And wildlife refuges and ecological reserves. But a lot of recreational open spaces also meet our definition. So places that people enjoy for nature, but they are generally intact. It also includes a lot of working lands. California has a really good tradition of protecting working lands, largely for endangered species. Previous talk mentioned the importance of protecting vernal pools. Many vernal pools in California are actually protected under private land conservation easement where grazing takes place. So those meet our definition. And that gets us to 24% of our lands, which means we have 6 million acres to go on land. And then in our marine areas, so our coastal waters, which is the 3 miles off the coast, our marine protected area network meets our definition, which gets us to 16% of our coastal waters. So we have about 500,000 acres to go in our coastal waters. And then I tell you that all conservation is important because I told you we have this really high, strong definition. But anything we do to protect biodiversity, whether it's planting a native garden, whether it's reducing your use of pesticides, whether it's just protecting a green space within a larger park that is native, that has value for protecting our biodiversity. In San Francisco, they're putting bee gardens on their bus stops, which is awesome. That is valuable for biodiversity conservation, even though it doesn't meet our 30 by 30, it's part of the larger movement. So I wanted to make sure you know that we believe that. Okay. So I already said that the goal of 30 by 30 is to protect our biodiversity. Our priorities for 30 by 30 are large, interconnected landscapes as much as possible. But of course, we also really want to protect those places that safeguard those rare endemics that we were discussing in earlier talks, places that have high biodiversity, whether they're close to other places or not. But we also know that when we protect spaces, we can really increase access to nature. And it was very interesting to work on this 30 by 30 initiative during COVID. Lots of you experienced this. We stayed within a mile of our homes. Lots of us had beautiful open spaces to go to, but many, many more people did not. And having these conversations during that moment in time, it really made clear that we need to advance people's access to nature while we're advancing 30 by 30. So that's a key part of our initiative. Anna did a good job of talking about why that's so important, and that's really central to the work we're doing. And at the same time, when we protect places, we want to use those places to draw down carbon and also buffer us from the effects of climate change. If you think about restoring wetlands along the coast, those are going to help us with sea level rise. So these three objectives are key to our work. That's what we want to do. Then there's how we want to do it. And I'm very proud of how we're approaching 30 by 30 in California. First and foremost, this administration is very committed to, and I think this time that we are in, we are not going back. We want to make sure that when we do this work, we are advancing justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And that doesn't just mean advancing access in places that are underserved. It's also about making sure we have the right people at the table when decisions are made, about including more people in the conservation work, building a workforce, and that's a key part of our initiative. Related but different is we really are committed to strengthening our tribal partnerships across California. We have over 300 California Native American tribes, and they have lessons to teach us, and they have a great desire to get their land back. And land back is actually part of our initiative, as well as co-management and opportunities to share information. During that year where I did the 17 workshops, we also met with over 70 Native American tribes, sometimes multiple times, to hear from them what they wanted out of this initiative. And they're very excited about the opportunity. As an aside, I'll tell you that California put $1.4 billion in last year's budget to advance 30 by 30, which is amazing. And not enough because land costs so much. But out of that, we have a $100 million set aside that is only for tribes. They don't have to compete with anyone else. It's only for tribes in California to advance their conservation efforts. So I'm pretty proud of that. And at the same time, we're going to do conservation in California, and we're going to show the rest of the world that you can, in fact, be the fourth largest economy, and you can have conservation. You can advance a clean energy agenda. You can be the breadbasket to the nation, and you can have economic development and do conservation. It's not either or, it's about smart planning and making sure you're thinking ahead about where you want to be. And we've done that very well in California for a very long time, and so that will be central to our work. This is the boring, wonky stuff. But look at this list. We have 10 concurrent pathways that we're pursuing to get us there. It's a lot of the things you would expect. Acquiring more land, putting more easements together, enhancing conservation on existing public lands, places that we already own, thinking strategically about mitigation. As we build highways and freeways and houses in California, we always require that there be an offset. It's something we should be proud of, and we want to do that in a strategic way so we protect as much biodiversity as possible. I won't read all these, but I want you to look at this list and think about, where do I fit in? Am I a scientist that's going to help evaluate those conservation outcomes? Am I part of a regionally led conservation coalition that's advocating for a place? There's room for all of us in this vision. I'll be quiet and let you read. The other super groovy thing that we did is build an online geographic information system. And I'm telling you, you don't have to be a GIS expert to play with this, but if you are, it's even more fun. But we built an online system that allows you to zoom in and out, you can type in an address and see how it meets, whether or not it meets our conservation standard, and what it looks like, and I'll walk you through these slides, relative to biodiversity across the state, climate change, and access. So I zoomed in on San Diego County. 0.81% of the state is where you are, of your conserved area. These are the places that meet our definition. You can see how many of those are owned by the state, how many of those are federal, and so on. So this is just an overview layer. Then you can look again at how biodiversity is distributed across San Diego County, where there's important habitat, where there's opportunities for connectivity. You can do an analysis of which habitat types are getting protection and which ones maybe need a little more love. I'm looking at you, herbaceous layer, hardwood woodland. Maybe that's an opportunity. And then you can also compare future climate projections. What are the temperatures going to look like in 10, 20, 30 years in this place? How are the seas going to rise? What's the precipitation going to be? And that gives you an opportunity to think strategically about protecting places and what are they going to look like? Are they going to be underwater? Am I protecting a wet place that will suddenly be dry? So it's a really powerful tool for accelerating regionally led conservation, which is at the core of what we want. We're setting an objective at the state level, but without all the partners across the state that make this happen, it's not possible. And so our goal is to empower you with tools, with resources, with inspiration to help us get it done. Another piece is we have our Access Explorer, which allows you to see where are the places that are protected that give access to nature. San Diego's doing pretty well. If I showed this same slide for Los Angeles County, only 3% of the population has a park or open space within a half mile of their home. That's an opportunity for advancing access to nature. It's doing a little better here in San Diego. You have a lot of green open space. That's good. Well done. But I'm sure you could do more. So the 30 by 30 partnership, the vision really is one kind of, if you're into conservation, I consider you already part of it. But we hope that you will join us because there's room for everyone. As I said, it's really, the intent is to build a network of people across the state that are doing this work so they can share lessons learned, they can share best practices. I can connect people that are working on a 2% tax for restoration. Where are you, Sandag? 1%? What'd you end up getting? Right? How can you share that best practice with somebody in a different county that wants to do the same thing? You know, how'd you get that done? What was the secret sauce? Building that partnership will allow us to move faster together and be more effective. So I hope that people like you will join, and I'll tell you how. So I want to leave you with this thought, take you back to the earth. I've had the incredible honor of being able to actually travel around the world and meet people that are working on 30 by 30. This is a global movement. So if you're protecting your 100 acres and you feel sometimes like you're alone and oh my God, somebody knocked down the fence again, think about the fact that there are actually thousands of people around the globe doing the same thing, all pulling in the same direction, helping us get to the same place. There are people in Wales and Catalonia and Ghana and Mexico. I've met them and they're so passionate and they care just as much as we do about making the world a better place. And so I want to leave you with that hope that your work matters and that what you do is going to help make our world better. So please join us and make a difference. And there's our website for how you can join. I also have stickers up here with our website, and you can put them on your water bottle, just like this. And I will take questions, but you have to turn the lights up because I can't see people. Somebody must have a question. Oh, over there. Hi.
As you know, in California, we're facing a massive housing shortage problem, or I should say housing affordability problem.
Definitely.
And so there's a lot of pressure on our backcountry to build where it's cheaper instead of in the urban core where it's more expensive. And so the state of California has done some creative things like SB 9, trying to allow property owners in the urban core to upzone. And so that can relieve some development pressure in the backcountry. But I'm wondering if California is also considering a decree that would prohibit certain kinds of development in the backcountry.
So for those of you online, the question was really about pressure to build housing, usually in unincorporated areas where there are fewer rules, right, which puts a lot of pressure on the backcountry. And we've done some good things in California to encourage smart development, and we have a long way to go, right? And the question is, how much farther are we going to go? And I will say, like, that is part of the reason we're pushing for regional conservation isn't just because we love all the people out there, but this is a local control state, right? Local land use decisions get made at the local level. And the state can only do so much. There's legislation that could be passed, but legislation doesn't happen by Jen Norris. It happens through our legislators and a legislative process. And so we need people to speak out for what their values are for those kinds of laws to be passed. But there are definitely, like the Strategic Growth Council, they're trying to create incentives for people to build more in the core. But I agree with you, that is a challenge. I think what we have on our side are very strong environmental laws that sometimes can be used for ill, but on the whole, they lead us to generally try to avoid places that are very sensitive. And the wildland-urban interface, there's a lot of push to not be in those places by CAL FIRE that works as part of my agency. So I will say I think it's coming, but we need a lot more community and public engagement on the topic. Don't be passive about it, because the loudest voices always get what they want. So be loud. I'll pick you. $6 million. It's a lot. It's a great question. So it's about how are we prioritizing the 6 million acres as we move forward? It's actually a really hard question, believe it or not, because for a lot of reasons. One, I don't think there's an ecosystem in California that doesn't need more conservation. I can't think of one. They're all threatened by climate change, development, or both. So for now, we're trying to push on all of it. You know, we've invested in programs where there's high need and low funding. So in last year's budget cycle, there was funding in oak woodland conservation and wetland conservation and riparian areas. And I think what we'll be doing as we move forward is assessing using our system, sort of see how it's shaking out, how people are investing through time, and adjust with how we fund. But we're not going to do a statewide which ecosystem is the most important. We want to use these tools to say when you're in a place, which are the places that we want to protect. Because conservation is both a mix of prioritization and serendipity. You don't always get the place you want, or the place you want sometimes comes available and you got to grab it while you can. So we're trying to create flexibility, but also really a lot of the programs that we've funded, they do require that you demonstrate that you're protecting biodiversity, but it's at a more local scale. But it's a really good question. I get it all the time. But for 100 million acres, that would be a 10-year analytical exercise. Anybody who's in grad school knows that we could talk about that forever. Somebody over here had a question. You, hi. You've seen my talk.
I love that California is leading the charge for 30 by 30. I was wondering, are there other states or countries that are also doing exceptionally well and doing anything innovative that we might adapt?
Oh, what are other countries doing that we could learn from? That's the question, right? You know, I think there are different little things everywhere that we learn. You know, I had this great opportunity to go to the United Kingdom. I went to England. We looked at the peat restoration. So cool, so needed. We went up to the coast and talked about conservation there. And there are lots of little tricks and cool things that they're doing that we're taking away. But what I really learned from the rest of the world when we had these conversations, especially in Montreal, is just how local conservation is, and you have to recognize that, and that each place is going to have to figure out how it works for them. All the rules are different in every place. Everyone has different laws, different opportunities. But as long as we're pulling in the same direction, we're going to make progress. And so I try to focus on that. But I will say we have incredible partnerships. Quebec is just about to start their 30 by 30, and we have a great relationship with them, and we're having incredible conversations about, you know, what are you doing, especially with, they have a lot of great work with Indigenous people that we're trying to learn from. So I could give you a long list, but off the top of my head, those are what come to mind. You in the back. How can we tell that we've hit the marks? Which marks? Right, so how do we know we're making progress on biodiversity, for example? So again, this gets back to sort of the prioritization. It's actually more complicated and harder to unpack in a talk, but we have a really incredible database of all the protected areas in California, really all the lands that are owned by government, and then all the places that have an easement. And we went into that database and we said, of those, these are the kinds of classifications that we think meet this strong definition. The way you get to be one of those places, and I'll pick the National Wildlife Refuge System, because I used to work for the Fish and Wildlife Service. To become a National Wildlife Refuge is a very long and very painful process. It takes an act of Congress, it takes an analysis, it takes a NEPA document, right? So to get to the point where you are a National Wildlife Refuge, you don't need me then to say, well, are they really protecting biodiversity? I mean, I'm not sure. They've gone through that process. So we picked the places that sort of by their definition, their purpose is to protect functional ecosystems. And then by ensuring that there's durability, we don't have to sort of go back and make sure they're still there, because we're relying on places that either it's permanent forever because it's owned, or it can't be undone without some massive rulemaking process that would take long enough that we would catch on. So, but to your point, that's why the long-term monitoring and assessment, it is important. And again, we generally rely on the organizations that have that own and manage those places, because they know too how important their biodiversity is. They care about those places and they're going to be safeguarding them. But what they need is resources, and that's just the perennial problem, is making sure we have enough money to steward those lands. And that really came up in our public engagement, how hard it is to find money to steward. Everybody likes to cut the ribbon and buy the land, but to invest in stewardship is really important. So again, I say this to you as voters in California, we invest in things that people care about. So telling other people how important that is helps us. Thanks for the question. I'll ask you with the hat. Hi. Mm-hmm. Do we have a wish list? So interestingly, I didn't show the map I didn't show it here, but if you go to our website, you'll see it. When we did these workshops, we did them in lots of ways, but one of the ways we did them was regionally. So we're going to go to the Inland Empire and talk to them about what matters to them and their conservation, and then we'll go up to the redwood forests. And groups sort of self-organized around those regions and came together, and they actually sent us their lists of the places they most wanted to protect. So in some ways we have their lists, but my interest is in really, I always know that if you know your place, you know what those places are that you want to protect. And so we're sort of taking our cues from our regional partners. Now that said, the state certainly knows of plenty of really amazing places that if we had $100 million sitting around, we would try to acquire them. But we don't have it's not politically fraught, but it's not wise to put places on a list because usually the price goes up. So, did you get a chipmunk earlier? Because I want to see it. Okay, thank you. Go. What's your question? So the question is, will we have more influence using 30 by 30 to sort of influence other activity? That's a really simplified way of what you said, but you asked about energy sector. I would say this, my title, my position is sort of, that's my responsibility. Not so much through 30 by 30. We really want 30 by 30 to be a voluntary, ground up voluntary kind of effort. It's a goal. We want everyone to join us and help us get it done, but it's not a regulatory process. But that said, because it is an administration priority, along with our clean energy goals, that I have a seat at the table when we're talking about those statewide goals and making sure that we're embedding biodiversity conservation into the work that we're doing, and that it's when we're thinking about the fifth climate assessment, we're not just thinking about solar panels, we're also thinking about protecting biodiversity. So my role at the state level, and it is pretty incredible that there is a position like this, it gives biodiversity a voice that it probably didn't have as strongly before. So I think that's pretty cool. Yeah. You. Mm-hmm. Yes. So the question is the one I cannot stand. It's about water, and how do I deal with that? No, it's a very fair question, but it's a hard one. Water in the West is super fraught, right? Because we've overallocated it. It's not all publicly owned. It's a public trust resource, and yet it's managed by private entities, so it's very complicated. But we have invested in programs that will allow us actually to buy flow. And sort of getting back to my point earlier about how do you become a conservation area, this isn't always true, but often when you're protecting a place, you're trying to protect it in its functional state. So I worked a lot on vernal pools. We would never say a vernal pool area was protected if it also had a well, because we'd say, well, the groundwater isn't going to be there to make sure that vernal pool is fed, right? So that's a backdoor way of saying the conservation, for it to work, generally needs water. And we are trying to incentivize programs like riparian rights, riparian forests, in-stream flow to sort of enhance that. But we don't have a separate freshwater goal. But it's not easy, and water is very expensive. So, like everything. Way in the back. Hi. Yeah, so what is the longevity of this program? Well, that's why I need you. That's why you need a sticker on your forehead. It's true. It's an administration priority. It's an executive order. There is legislation going through right now that might make it the goal of the state of California, but it's still a goal, right? It's not a requirement. I think, though, I want to believe that there is such a groundswell of support for this work. What 30 by 30, I said this, but I'm going to say it again. What 30 by 30 has done is really sort of gathered up all the environmental energy and brought it into sort of one point and one place. And so when people, and they do, stand at the podium to give public comment during the budget hearings, they all say, you need to fund 30 by 30. They don't get super specific, you need to protect soil microbes. They say 30 by 30, and legislators hear 30 by 30, oh, that sounds interesting. I'm not sure what that is, but people like it, and it creates this groundswell of energy. So there is no long-term guarantee, but I do believe that the environmental community has latched onto this as a really powerful way for us to really pull in the same direction. And my hope and dream is that enough people will want it, that even when I'm gone, it'll keep going. But get a sticker. I think, go here. Well, hello. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the question was about other threats to biodiversity, in particular oil and gas drilling, offshore wind, or offshore drilling, probably doesn't matter. And I will say, 30, and lithium valley, and willow, yeah, 30 by 30 doesn't solve any of that for you. I mean, I wish it did. Wouldn't that be amazing? But we are still going to have all the same conversations about resource use and all the threats to biodiversity. Those do not go away because we've committed to 30 by 30. But what I think 30 by 30 lets us do is get ahead of some of those crisis points. It lets us protect things before we even know what they are. So we're not dealing with this emergency room. We're down to the last two, and we have to have Herculean efforts. So 30 by 30 is really a proactive. We're still going to have all those other conflict conversations, and climate change is real, and we've got to address it. But this is a way to protect habitat now, not wait. Not wait till there's a conflict. Just get it protected durably, so it will be there for us. So it's not a great answer, but we still have to do all those things too. But 30 by 30 is not working on that. Sorry. She hated my answer, but it's true. Okay, I'll pick you way up there.
Could you just kind of briefly talk about the types of habitats you're trying to conserve, and then also the connectivity between some coastal ecosystems and inland ecosystems? Because some of the threats to biodiversity can be the lack of resilience that species being able to move in and out. So how does 30 by 30 kind of address that issue?
So as I told you, we're really interested in, anytime we can get them, larger and interconnected landscapes. So we're actually investing a lot in wildlife crossings. Some of you might know about the new Annenberg crossing over 10 lanes of 101 freeway, but we're doing lots and lots of other ones, under crossings, fish passage, taking down small dams, trying to create that connectivity, recognizing absolutely that, rivers are the connection between the land and the sea most of the time. And all of this work, we have the coastal waters piece, but our coastal conservancy really does this amazing job of bridging the land and the ocean, right? They're working right in that coastal zone. And there have been big investments in the Coastal Conservancy to help us identify the most important habitats. But I'd say, the key habitats that we need most in California, number one is freshwater and wetland ecosystems. They are the most endangered in our state. We're down to just a few % of what we used to have in the Central Valley. Anytime we can get more wetland habitat, that's important. But, oak woodlands are important, redwoods are important. There's just, like I said, there's not an ecosystem out there except for maybe snow and ice on the top of the mountains that is underrepresented in our portfolio, and we want to see more of it. And 6 million acres is a lot. Who's actually done conservation where they've gotten land conserved with an actual purchase or easement? Anybody want to say how long it takes to make that happen? 10 years. Yeah, it's hard. It's hard work, whether it's 2 acres or 2,000, and you got to have a lot of money. So it's 6 million acres, we got a long way to go. We got 7 years, so get to work. How about way in the back with the puffer jacket? Hi.
Hi, thank you, Dr. Norris. I really appreciate your presentation. You have one slide up with a pathway to the 3030. One of the points was institutionalized and bank mitigation.
Yep.
With that point, the question is direct: can we expand that outside of the footprint of California into Mexico? Before you answer that question, I want to bring up 2 things in your presentation. One was the global perspective and the biodiversity issue globally, which I appreciate. And the second was a map that you showed of the biodiversity in the U.S. The one is 30 minutes away from here. There's always a gap. I've worked with California Conservation Wildlife and Habitat as well. This is something that we have been trying to get a handle with some of the key projects that we have down here. So my question again is, do you think you can bring that advanced mitigation, being proactive about biodiversity? This I got brought up with a panel discussion earlier. A lot of the panel discussion of national cooperation of biodiversity over across the border. So I was worrying as far as natural resource agencies not being explored, if you have a legal mechanism to make that right, and with that, can you be proactive to look at that? You mentioned wetlands. Southern California, there's no place to mitigate the wetlands anymore, really. Surrounded by highways, second highways. So given that there are some robust systems in Mexico,
So for those of you online, I can't recreate that question. It was very good. It was about can we think about using mitigation funding essentially to protect places in Mexico, sort of as a way of sort of expanding our binational reach and protecting, some of the same species that we're interested in. Is that a fair summary? And it's interesting. I've been in meetings where people have proposed this before. I think it sounds right ecologically. I don't know that we have the legal mechanisms yet to make that possible. And I think there's always the risk of seeming sort of like we're exporting our conservation, that some people will feel that way. We should be fixing the problems that we made here with places here, whether that's restoring some of those wetlands. I mean, there's a lot of opportunity with a lot of the abandoned industrial sites on the coast to restore wetlands. So I think it's interesting, but I'm not sure mitigation is the tool. I think there might be, I think straight up investment in those habitats and species is probably more likely, but I'd be interested in talking about it if you have great ideas, I'm open to hearing them.
That'd be great. We are working on the table on that.
Great. Awesome. Yeah, let's talk. I'm going to go over here. Anybody over here? Gentleman back there. Oh, and you'll be next. Okay. How do we feel about restoration? So one of our pathways is restoration. So absolutely, it's a critical need. We cannot protect our way out of the crisis because so many of our ecosystems were down to a very small percent. And so, floodplain restoration is a big priority of this administration. We're investing a lot in trying to fix a lot of our rivers so we can have better groundwater recharge, better buffering from storms. This last couple of months tells us how important that is. So definitely restoration is key. And I didn't talk about cutting green tape, which is my other initiative, but that's all about, how can we accelerate permitting, funding to get restoration done more effectively and more quickly and at scale. I was a regulator for a really long time. Mendel, where are you? Say hi. So I did that for a long time. I know how the rules work. There he is. Hi. So I'm looking for ways to make that happen more effectively. It's absolutely critical. And we have a lot of partners who are doing incredibly important restoration, particularly along the coast, but elsewhere as well. You over here. Good.
This is exciting for everyone who's in the room, and so I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
I'm interested in knowing more about the incentives for local government that might exist within 30. I noticed on the list of 10 priorities that there was purchases, there were conservation easements, something about maybe partnering with governments, but nothing about getting governments to dedicate or permanently protect the lands that they own and hold. And I would note that the canyon system that I love and protect in the city of San Diego didn't look like it was on the list of on the map of places that was well protected. With a lot of San Diego's multiple species conservation program lands. They didn't appear to be on the map, although some of them were quite small, so that would be a question. And so that led me to think about some of the lands that the city of San Diego does continue to hold. And to note to you that in 2005 or so, the city identified about 17,000 acres of land that it believed it was ready to conserve and eligible for permanent protection, dedication as open space parkland. People in this room and legislators, including Tony Atkins, President of the Senate, participated in 2 waves of processes to get about 12,000 of those acres dedicated permanently in San Diego. They left about 6,000 acres on the table. And those lands are still on the table. And what can you do? What can 3030 do to help the city of San Diego go ahead and set aside those 6,000 acres that can give you 5,900,000
Okay, another long question for people on Zoom. I am sorry. This is about protecting places in San Diego and how we can incentivize local governments to maybe do more. But then you also asked about MSCP lands not being on the map, and I just want to address that really quickly because it's a it's a problem that I have to say. We have an incredible database of all the protected areas in California. It is incomplete, and so MSCP lands absolutely should be on that map, and if they're not, we're trying to work with our local HCP partners all over the state. A lot of them just aren't in because a lot of those lands got an easement, and that easement got handed to a biologist at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and they put it in a drawer, and it did not end up in our database. So that's where the state and the feds have to talk to each other better. So we're working on that. But incentivizing local governments. A lot of local governments are really excited about 30 by 30. They see it as an opportunity to get this place protected that they've always wanted, and they're already at the door knocking, asking for that money, asking for technical assistance, looking for a way to build their regional conservation strategy so they can make the case that this is important. So that's happening. So I would say I can go talk to the city of San Diego, but so can you. I mean, it's about inspiring people to want to be part of the movement, about recognizing the value of it. Like, we can't make them do it. We can only show them the way and offer the tools. So there's a ton of money. I mean, there was $1.4 billion. And so that money is going largely towards acquisitions and easements. Some of it's going towards regional conservation planning so that you can be ready for the next wave. And I don't know if you follow the ins and outs of state government, but there's talk of a resilience bond. And if that passes, there will be a big chunk of money for things like 30 by 30. So the movement is happening, so San Diego should not get left behind, is what I would tell them. I feel like I've been on this side of the room, and I should go to that side of the room. Okay, you.
So I'm really happy with the efforts that you guys are doing to support the tribal communities and giving them back their lands. So I really want to acknowledge that. My question is for researchers like me, we are working with tribal communities, we like to support them. What would be the priorities? What are you looking at, or what's your recommendation for us when we support them to achieve those goals that you are trying to? How can we support that they get those lands?
So the question is, how can researchers help support tribal communities with their efforts towards land back? So I'm not sure I have a good answer. I would say the fact that you're already working with local tribal partners is great, and they can tell you what will most help them succeed. Some tribes are very sophisticated. They know they have a land trust already set up. They already know how to do this, and others are like 2 or 3 people, and they would love technical assistance. They want to know how to write an easement. So it really depends on the tribe. But I think, again, I'm sort of talking about political action a lot tonight, but this recognition that this is a value of California, that we are okay, that there is a fund for tribes that nobody else can get access to. This is a down payment. It's a drop in the bucket for what we need, but we're currently in the process of developing the guidelines for how that money will get spent. And it's complicated, as you might expect, because who has the right to get the land back? It's actually more complicated than you would think. But I would say offering your expertise, but also listening and listening for what the needs are, and being open to understanding their goals and their values. I just had so many incredible conversations that I won't repeat, but there are really a lot of communities in California that are excited by the possibility of having access to their land, not just for access to their land, but for access for ceremony, for protecting the biodiversity in the ways that their ancestors have taught them. So I think it is something to be really proud of. What are we looking for in the proposals? That's what we're working on right now in the guidelines. So we haven't got there yet. We have draft guidelines out. We're getting feedback. It might be just closed, but we're getting feedback exactly on what we're going to look for. And I think the criteria are going to be somewhat different from the way we are going to handle the other kinds of grants, because we really want to show, recognize that not every tribe is starting with, deep expertise in all the areas. So, and offering a lot of technical assistance as well. I'm going to get the hook. Oh my God, I'm way over time. Am I okay? You were supposed to give me the hook. I'm happy to go all night. I love this. I love this topic, surprisingly. You in the front.
So we have been talking about protecting biodiversity all day,
Yeah, so is there support for improving our data sets, particularly with regard to insects? Sounds like you like insects. I do too. So that we do a better job of knowing what we're protecting. Yeah, so there's so many, it's like an onion, this work. We have a really incredible network of scientists, the California Biodiversity Network, that is helping us identify the science needs, and again, like bring those needs to the legislature if necessary, but also talk amongst themselves about, what data systems do we have. Then they do their work sort of in roundtables, and one of them is their bioinformatics roundtable. And one of the things we're really interested in doing is, we talked about INAT earlier, iNaturalist. How do we bring community science into the systems that we are using now? So all the data that I showed you are the California Department of Fish and Wildlife's biodiversity data sets. But we want to be able to sort of plug into that community-led science. So that's one way. But there also there's funding in last year's budget. This doesn't help with insects, but to improve our fine-scale vegetation mapping. And then there's also some funding for museum collections, which I don't remember the details of that. So there's money. But again, this is sort of part of the large 30 by 30 umbrella, is to understand all these pieces are important. And the funding is coming. At least last year there was a fair amount. This year's not going to be so great. So, hook. I got the hook. But I'm not going anywhere if you want to come talk to me. And I do have stickers, I'm not lying, with our website on it. Please check out our website and get on our mailing list. My goal is to double my mailing list by the end of the year. So, if everybody in this room signs up twice, we're pretty close. Thank you for your time. I really appreciated it.